So, all right. So, as I mentioned, we have a very full agenda. So, the agenda is broken into two main categories. So, we have data security and then really Microsoft Purview. So, the data security, we're going to be talking more about broadly why does this matter? Why does Purview matter? What is the space? Why does this matter? And includes, as you can see here, understanding it, uh, um, understanding the data risks, renewed focus on data regulations and compliance. Um, and as I mentioned earlier, AI, right? So AI is putting a lot of pressure on making sure that we have things secured because that old security by obscurity thing isn't going to work very well with a strong AI solution. And where to start when building a data security solution. And then we'll get more specific into Purview. And like I said, Purview is a very broad and vast tool. So we'll cover everything from the capabilities as well as licensing, which is complicated, and we'll go on from there. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris. Chris, please take it away.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. So to build on what Doug was saying about our agenda today, uh, to break it down simply, we're going to look at what the catalysts or drivers are for renewed interest in data security solutions, and in particular, Microsoft Purview. Uh, Again, Purview is a very broad suite of tools. We will cover some of the key features during the first part of our session today, uh, primarily covering those key features that will help you get started with Purview and achieve success most efficiently. Please note that this is not intended as a comprehensive review of all the capabilities of Purview. This is a get started session. So taking a look at data security and those drivers or catalysts for renewed interest in those sort of solutions. Key to getting started is understanding data risk as a whole. Um, for most organizations, there is absolutely a concern around loss of trust. Do current customers still want to work with you if you lose their trust? Will your current personnel still want to work with you if you lose their trust? Being compliant with regulations and standards is, well, a standard for doing business. If your customers don't trust you, they will not likely do business with you. Further, reputational damage is what happens when there's a data leak. Do you want to be that organization that's in the news? Do you want to be remembered as that organization that leaked personnel data or customer data? With that type of reputation, the ability to gain new customers and retain existing customers is drastically reduced. Last, not least, fines are significant and they are real. Every vertical, to some extent, is subject to some sort of regulatory compliance, which, if there's not necessarily a direct fine associated with it, credentialing for your organization may be impacted and may impact your ability to do business. And that does lead to one of the primary drivers for this renewed interest in data security solutions. Regulations are increasing around the world. They're creating a need for responsible use of data. This is both by governing bodies and also by regulatory bodies. An example would be GDPR as a governing body for the EU. Absolutely results in fines, withdrawal of licenses, and again, that lowering of credibility with regulators and your customer base as a whole. Another major driver for renewed interest in data security uh, is AI. Uh, what is that risk of AI exposure? The AI-powered applications deliver great time-saving utilities and tools to provide valuable insights and increase productivity. However, they also potentially expose a significant amount of new data regarding your organization's activities and content produced by the tools. Um, so using Microsoft Copilot as an example, to fully leverage Copilot's benefits, businesses need to understand how to configure and manage the tool. The setup process, uh, like any other tool, is going to require setting up user accounts, defining role-based access and permissions, and of course, configuration with other tools. Day-to-day management of a AI application such as Copilot is going to include monitoring the performance and usage of Copilot, identifying and addressing issues, and providing ongoing training and support to end users. Now, I highlight Copilot as an example. Uh, if you've started your journey with Copilot and have visited the administrative portal for Copilot, you'll note that the data security and compliance section, if you click that link, it is going to direct you to Microsoft Purview as your primary solution for maintaining data security and compliance with Copilot. I want to take a brief note on some of the advancements that are happening in regards to AI capabilities and Purview as a whole. Um, the new Purview portal contains a preview resource referred to as the AI Hub. This AI Hub is a very powerful tool, and I highly recommend any organization who is adopting Copilot and other AI tools to make maximum use of the AI Hub. This will help your organization monitor for ethical use of AI within your organization, uh, noting that Microsoft is rapidly developing different reporting techniques and technologies. For example, as depicted here is a great getting started control, and that would be controlling for unethical behavior in AI. This is a rapidly evolving tool. However, I did want to take a moment to take this quick note to let our teams know that this is perhaps not a widely advertised tool, but it is present today within your tenant. So back to the agenda. Many organizations are faced with data security challenges. So depicted here, some takeaways from various reports, some a little more dated than others, but they still hold true today. Um, there, your organization is not alone. A majority of organizations have lost confidence to be able to detect and prevent loss of data. Uh, Majority of organizations have acknowledged that a significant proportion of their data is not classified or protected today. And the majority of organizations also have that key challenge of where to get started, how to get started in producing a solution to secure data. We hope to answer those questions by presenting key questions that must be answered by your organization before proceeding with designing the overall solution. First is that identifying what is sensitive information as it pertains to your organization. What types of that information do we need to look for? Regulatory criteria is a great place to start. And with that being defined, another challenge is around proprietary sensitive information types. So those may require custom solutions in order to properly identify and classify data that is specific to your organization. Next, we want to define the scope of your solution. Where is sensitive data stored? And that is, in and of itself is often a significant challenge as well. And last but not least, when you're designing your solution, defining governance around who is performing the discovery, classification, and monitoring and control of sensitive data. These key questions should be answered at the start of your data solution design. With those key questions answered, Microsoft Purview provides comprehensive data solutions to help protect, govern, and manage that data. It provides a unified platform that integrates Azure Purview with Microsoft 365 compliance, enhance visibility across all of your organizational data, lifecycle management, risk management, and support for regulatory compliance are all in one platform. Do want to make a quick note again on the evolution of Purview, which is a day-to-day operation at this point. Um, Please note that if you're using Purview, that you may be used to the compliance.microsoft.com portal. That is being retired by end of year. So please take the opportunity to become familiar with purview.microsoft.com as the new portal. And visually, there is a distinction between the two. The image depicted above is the old portal. The image depicted below is the new one. Getting started with Purview and Purview licensing may be complex. Depicted here are different the licensing grid provided by Microsoft and its modern work licensing ecosystem. So we see that many of these features are segmented based off of certain groupings of those features and what is accessible based off of your licensing platform. Uh, and yes, absolutely, it's a challenge to sort which features are where and what exactly is Purview specific. Uh, to simplify the licensing overview, Microsoft has defined Purview as primarily three main pillars for data security, data governance, risk and compliance. Go. Uh, for this portion of the session, we are primarily going to focus on the data security and key features within that space, as well as key features within risk and compliance. Data security would be defined as a set of data security solutions to help you discover and protect sensitive information. These solutions include data loss prevention, information barriers, information protection, insider risk management, and privileged access management. For today's session, we're just going to touch upon the underlined items around data loss prevention and information protection as great starting points. In the risk and compliance area, these are solutions to help your organization minimize compliance risks and meet regulatory requirements. Key features would be auditing, communication compliance, compliance manager, data lifecycle management, and e-discovery. Again, underlined here, we are going to present key starting points to help you maximize your investment in Purview with rapid results. Compliance Manager is a great holistic tool for your 365 tenant as a whole. It's designed to help organizations adhere to various regulations. When you first visit the Compliance Manager, you'll see that there is a list of improvement actions for your tenant. Consider it a to-do list and for your data security and compliance team. The initial list that will be presented is based off of Microsoft's own security and data compliance baselines. However, if your organization requires it, you may audit against specific regulatory bodies, such as ISO 27K, CMMC, SOX, NIST, etc. Uh, Microsoft has a robust library covering international regulatory bodies to which you are able to assess your entire 365 tenants against those standards. Now, these are tenant-based recommendations, identifying any potential violations per regulatory code. Moving on down through the other starting points for maximizing results with Purview, we're going to look at the operation or process of designing a data security solution for your 365 tenant. We would start with data classification and the corresponding tools, data discovery, label policies, auto labeling, and data loss prevention. So how do we find data that might impose privacy and regulatory risks? We would do this by starting with sensitive information types. Microsoft 365 includes well over 200 sensitive information types at this time uh, for different countries, industries, or information types required. Sensitive information comes in many forms, financial data, PII, user credentials, certificates, etc. Examples of these built-in uh, sensitive information types would be the U.S. bank account number, U.S. driver's license number, social security number, and many, many more. Uh, Based off of definitions, PII definitions, for example, by the Department of Labor, um, financial information types that align with Sarbanes-Oxley, uh, and cybersecurity standards that align with NIST, and many other regulatory bodies. Regulatory templates is key to answering that question of where to start when defining your sensitive information. It will make quick work of a majority of that challenge. Having defined your sensitive information types, the next part of the process is going to be data discovery. And that's the scoping of and determining where that sensitive information is at in your environment. There's a couple quick start tools. One would be the Content Explorer. That allows a drill through view of your 365 resources based on a sensitive information type. And it is ideal for a quick overview, but may not be the ideal reporting tool. The content search tool is a very powerful tool that will produce verbose results regarding sensitive information within your entire Microsoft 365 tenant, um, to which you'll have very concise reports in order to help further classify data and determine, again, the scope of where your sensitive data lives. Having defined your sensitive information types and understanding where your data is, a next tool to put into place would be labels and labeling policies. Uh, Having your labels defined according to those sensitive information types will help provide consistent labeling or tagging of data within your Microsoft 365. Oh, pardon me.
Oh, pardon me.
No problem.
No problem.
Um, Very good. The consistency of labeling that has obvious merits. Uh, Creating label policies is the next step, having defined your labels, which again, make sure data is properly classified and protected. One of the key items that labeling brings to the table is just that core functionality of ensuring that data is encrypted properly, particularly if it's sensitive information. Uh, the next challenge would be assigning the label policies, to which you could do either manually or by using rules to automatically assign labels based off of discovered sensitive information types. So it's key to understand at this point, they're back to the licensing question that auto labeling is a functionality that's provided by the Microsoft E5 license and or the E5 compliance add-on. Without that, you still have the option to manually apply labels, but that can be a time-consuming task. So the benefits of automatic labeling are quite significant if your environment has a tremendous amount of data. Auto labeling is a feature in Purview that you can automatically classify your data on predefined rules. It ensures that your data is properly labeled and protected, and is very highly recommended that auto labeling be run first in a simulation mode. This will help your organization ensure that auto labeling has gone through a full test cycle and has been refined accordingly to ensure that false positives are properly eliminated and that user impact could be assessed prior to pushing auto labeling into production. Also need to a very confusing topic when it comes to labels and auto labeling is that when you create a label policy, it is possible to configure it to use an automatic application of labels. That happens at the application level. So if your user opens up Word and starts copying sensitive information into Word, they possibly could be configured to have that option presented to the user to manually apply the label. That happens only at that application opportunity. So that happens in a data in use scenario. Auto labeling with the hyphen is a different feature entirely. Auto labeling in the information protection section will provide a systematic scan of your environment and automatically apply labels accordingly. Very key difference. Sometimes the documentation is a little fuzzy there. So I hope I made that cleared that up for some people. Next key tool, now that data has been defined, discovered, and classified, is data loss prevention, which is a feature that will help your organization prevent accidental or malicious leaks of sensitive data by monitoring, detecting, and blocking any exfiltration attempts. Creating DLP policies in Purview is straightforward. However, it does require key decision points around defining criteria, scope, and most importantly, enforcement. Again, it is highly recommended that DLP policies be run first in simulation mode. It again allows you to go through a full test cycle, determine user impact, and refine criteria, scope, and enforcement. Once your DLP policies are ready for production, it's automatic. And you can rest easy knowing that your DLP policies are now protecting your sensitive information. Now, having covered very key features within Purview, particularly those that are going to help you get started right away with your data security solution, should also be highlighted that Purview offers additional capabilities well beyond your 365 tenant, whether it's social media apps, perhaps a healthcare system. It's important that the non-Microsoft data generated by your org each day can be covered by these compliance solutions. This is where data connectors would come into play. So you have the ability to import data from apps like Slack, WhatsApp, and many others. Categories for email, social media, healthcare, HR, many more. Once imported, data may be covered by many compliance solutions like e-discovery, communication compliance, and the features that Pierre will now take over the presentation. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you this afternoon. Pierre, go ahead and take it away from here.
Will do. Let me pull up my slides. And let me share.
And while we're switching over, I just will, I forgot to mention earlier, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, but we do expect to have a little bit of time at the end to open up for questions then as well. So we will be monitoring chat.
Yep, good afternoon, everyone. So I am planning on kind of picking this up where, Chris left off here. So we are circling back a little bit to kind of those three organizational pillars for Purview. And specifically, I'm going to be looking at the data governance side of this. And there is a fair bit of overlap with some of these tools, especially when we get into, let's say, some of the sensitivity labels for data and so forth. But I think the important thing to understand here is that the data governance tools are not necessarily coming from the perspective of risk or security. They're really more coming from the perspective of just getting a general understanding of what you have, where you have it, how your users are utilizing it. So when we look at this diagram here, you'll kind of see that how Microsoft has this defined is that these components are primarily for your data consumers, your data engineers, and your data officers. And again, I don't want to imply that this doesn't play into the larger Purview picture for security and risk compliance, because it absolutely does, but that isn't necessarily the focus of these tools specifically. I think it's also important to point out that the history of these tools also is coming from a different place. In general, Purview, while we talked about it covering a broad set of capabilities and being a really large suite of tools, it's also kind of a hodgepodge suite of tools in its current iteration. And we'll talk a little bit about where Microsoft is planning to go with this and how they're trying to unify this under that single kind of new Purview portal experience that Chris mentioned earlier. But as it sits today, several of these components are a little bit more standalone than we would like to see, and they kind of are not as well integrated as maybe they will be in the near future. But let's hop into this. So from a Purview data governance perspective, we are looking at five major components. We have data catalog, data map, data policy, data sharing, and kind of the data estate insights, which is a reporting component of this. And we'll briefly kind of take a look at each of these just so you have a understanding of what the capabilities are. But again, keep in mind that there's overlap across some of these as well. So first, looking at kind of the data catalog portion of this, the main concept here is this provides a central repository for metadata around your data wherever it lives. The first and foremost kind of target of this data tends to be database systems, but it does not have to be a database system. It could be files stored within a lake or blob storage. It could also be software as a service solutions like something like Salesforce or something. But the idea again is we are capturing that metadata about this, the structural metadata about this data and where it lives, and we're then aggregating that together in a place where your data users, those data engineers, those data consumers have a place to go in and kind of understand how this data fits together. And that's where the data discovery and classification part of this comes in as well. There is a search engine that is built on top of this. So as an example, you could search for something, pretty generic like a count or customer or something like that, and it would return back to you everywhere that kind of concept of, let's say, customer lives in your environment. It could be across several different systems as an example. And to further kind of enhance this data and make it usable, Purview provides a data glossary service where we can take business terms, define those, and then tack that on and enhance kind of the maybe the more technical terms underneath. This is especially useful when we're talking about legacy ERP systems and some of these massive software packages that organizations use. When you look at the data behind something like SAP, one, the table structure is not in English, but two, it's also severely concatenated and codified in terms of how these things are organized. And so unless you're a data professional that works in that environment frequently, it's going to be really difficult for you to navigate it. So having this crossover with this glossary integration allows a data steward to apply more common terms that your business might use for these different data components to help them find it. And then finally, kind of as part of data catalog, there is a role-based access system. So you have different roles where certain roles may be able to manage this metadata repository. Other roles may only be able to kind of have read-only or view access to it. And in other cases, certain elements of this may be sensitive altogether. And so you're blocking it from certain groups of users. So you can kind of pick and line up what elements of your catalog are available to what kind of classes of users. So how does this work, though? The way that it works is it's using a scanning technology. It actually works very much like a search engine works, something like Google or Bing, where it goes out and it kind of crawls across your data using a scanning service. This is something you need to set up. It's not something that's necessarily automatic, although the refresh of this data is automatic once it is established and set up, but it will go out and it'll periodically scan your various data sources that you've connected to Purview. And it extracts the metadata then from those systems and begins to catalog it. And this is an important point here, is that the actual data from these systems is not being moved into Purview. It's just the metadata around it, the descriptive data, the structural data, that sort of thing that is being captured as part of this process. During that extraction, it also can go through a classification process. This is very similar to some of the sensitivity labeling and auto labeling that Chris had mentioned earlier. In fact, it piggybacks a lot off of some of those pre-built catalogs of sensitive information. So it has the ability to identify certain patterns in your data for, let's say, PII, or it could be some sort of credit card number, whatever it happens to be. There's different pattern recognitions and different classes of these different classifiers that you can apply to the data so that it'll automatically identify attributes within that data as containing something sensitive. And then it can automatically apply labels and it becomes part of your catalog. I do, though, want to reiterate that this is not necessarily for the purposes of securing your data or the risk and compliance like it is in the other components. It is more about, again, just getting a general understanding through this catalog of what data you have, where it lives, and how it is being used. As you scan through your data across your organization, you may be surprised to learn that there is maybe some sensitive data in data sets that you weren't aware of, as an example. And now you can utilize that to go back and maybe apply some policy and so forth to it. But the general idea here is that it would get classified, it would then be integrated with your business glossary, and then it's ultimately integrated into that catalog. And this metadata can be continuously updated so that as changes are being made to these data sources, they are being reflected inside of your catalog. So the next thing that we'll go over here is the Purview data map. This is very strongly cross-related to catalog. A lot of the scanning capabilities that we just discussed overlap here with data map. And the idea behind data map, though, is just that, is creating a map, a logical map essentially of your data, where it lives, what the relationships are between that data, how the data is flowing. So there's lineage mapping, there's relationship mapping, and there's just general asset mapping. So you can kind of see where the stuff is. And it ties in to that metadata that's being extracted for the catalog to do some of the sensitive data detection and so forth as well. So as you are browsing through a data map or a data lineage, you can potentially see where there is that sensitive information lying inside of your data. And it gives you this kind of comprehensive view in theory of what is there. There's a pretty wide range of data sources that are supported with data map and data catalog. They cover most of the Microsoft technologies. You can see there's a ton of Azure different data services here. Plus, there's on-prem services like SQL Server and so forth. But it also covers data sources in other clouds like RDS and Amazon and Redshift or Google's BigQuery and so forth. And so there is a pretty wide range of options here. But in addition to what you have available, the Purview catalog is built on top of a set of open source APIs that mimic Apache Atlas, which is another metadata storage tool. And those APIs allow you to do some custom integrations as well. So if you have a data source that maybe is unique to your business, it's something you guys have developed, or maybe it's just a commercial product that doesn't happen to have integration, there are REST APIs and there's an entire tool set for integrating with Purview's data catalog and the data map. And there's a number of third-party tools that do this as well, especially master data management tools, tools like Prophecy, tools like Clued In, already will utilize Purview as the metadata repository for their master data processes. So they're not keeping yet another repository of this metadata. It will build on top of what you have in your Purview system and enhance it even further. And as I'm alluding to here, you also have that ability to enhance this and kind of build on top of it with custom APIs and so forth to make it an even deeper, stronger repository for your use. And this is where, to me, the primary, and I'm coming from this from the angle of data and AI as a solution, this is kind of the primary use case for us, is taking something like a data warehouse or an analytics solution and or the sources leading into that and being able to map that out in a way that is cataloging what we have because we're dealing with a lot of sources. We're compiling those sources together into some sort of consolidated resource. And the documentation of that isn't always clear or easy to kind of maintain, and Purview can help with that greatly to get that kind of handle. And then, of course, then you have all of the other security and compliance stuff layered on top of that, where you can go even further. And that's really kind of the next part. And that is the Purview data policy. And this is data policy from a governance perspective. So it's allowing you to have this kind of centralized management interface for managing access to certain resources. This is a relatively new piece of functionality if in kind of the whole Purview world here. So it is somewhat limited into what it can do today. It's mostly applying data policy to Azure-based resources. It also has some crossover from a development perspective to tie into Azure DevOps to apply policy and so forth there around new data assets that are being developed by your organization. But the concept here is that I, as an administrator, could go into the single pane of glass view of my data infrastructure and I can apply permissions from here. So I could grant permissions to, let's say, certain storage accounts or data lake, that sort of thing, without having to actually go to those individual resources inside of my Azure portal and apply it. And probably a bigger advantage of this is I can define what these policies look like, and then I can have them globally applied to all of those types of resources that this is able to manage. So I don't necessarily, again, have to manage them one by one. I can have global rules of who has access to what type of data living in, let's say, an Azure storage account. And so it helps, again, with the governance side of this. Building on that idea kind of further, there's this concept of Purview data sharing. Right now, this is really only supported on top of Data Lake and blob storage inside of Azure, but I expect that as this matures, it's going to cover more areas. But this is a tool that allows you to share aspects of that data either externally with other vendors, partners, whatever that happens to be outside of your organization, but it can also be used to share data internally as well. That might be a situation where you have a conglomerate of different organizations that are all under one parent org and you're sharing amongst each other, or it could be more granular still, where it's like divisions within an organization that happen to have their own specific blob storage and data lake components. It does allow fairly granular control here where you can set up these sharing rules at an individual file level, at a folder level. It doesn't necessarily have to be a situation where you're sharing out the entirety of, let's say, your data lake in order to give a vendor access to some specific data. And it does work in near real time. And what it means here is that as new data, let's say, is being added to a folder that you have shared inside of your data lake, this sharing policy gets applied with minimal delay. It should show up very quickly for whatever partner you are sharing this data with. And the benefits here is that we're not duplicating yet another copy of this data. I don't have to land it somewhere else to be shared with these vendors. I can allow them to have a read-only copy of this data to access it, and it can be granularly controlled within this larger set to kind of help do this and still manage the sharing activities, the security, and so forth centrally. Again, this is also a relatively new feature. It is still in preview, so it's not fully rolled out yet either. So again, I would expect this to span more as it kind of matures. So to tie all of this together from the data governance perspective is a series of kind of reporting capabilities that are provided in the governance portal called Data Estate Insights. And the idea here is it's giving you kind of an all-up view of your data assets, gives you, common information like counts and things like that. But it also gives you some reports specifically around adoption, governance metrics, usage, those type of things. So you can understand, as an example, how your data catalog is being used, who is using it, how are they using it, what components are they using, that sort of thing. But it also gives you some generic kind of information around your data quality and how curated different assets are. As an example, you might be pulling stuff into the data catalog, but a data steward hasn't actually gone in there to update, who are the kind of the owners of this data. They haven't applied maybe some of the business glossary things to it. There's other, things that it might be looking at to kind of determine the overall health of your data estate here. But overall, the goal is to give you some actionable insights that you can use to resolve your gaps in your governance. And so it's just a series of kind of reporting tools that are built in to this platform. So kind of to the licensing discussion, there is not specific licensing per se associated with the data governance features of Purview. Instead, these various Purview governance components are usage-based, so they're consumption-based. And so there's a cost involved with the different activities that are occurring in this environment. And typically this would be tied to an Azure subscription, and that is how those metrics would incur cost and where those costs would show up. And so there's specific activities that do cost money. From a data map perspective, the the data map, the maintaining of that map is considered to be kind of an always on activity. And so it is really metered by the month, or as long as the map exists. You could delete the map, let's say mid-month, and then you won't incur costs for the rest of it. But assuming that this map is permanent within your environment and is constantly evolving and adding to, just having the map service as part of this incurs cost. And then there are costs associated with scanning. The big cost factor here is the duration of those scans. So the more tables, the more data it has to iterate over, the longer it potentially runs, and the more cost then is potentially metered for this. Additionally, the frequency of the scans impacts that as well. Are you scanning, every day? Are you scanning once a week, once a month, every 6 months? And so these are things that, as kind of a steward of this environment, you would want to manage appropriately, because some data sources may not, especially from that metadata perspective, be changing very frequently. So maybe an every 6 month scan is good enough for maintaining my catalog along that, and I can then save money over trying to scan this daily. The enrichment processes, these are the auto labeling, the classification of that data. They utilize vCourse inside of Azure to perform those tasks, to look at that metadata and compare it to those known kind of sets of matching criteria that's doing. So that also incurs cost. And then kind of the last thing that incurs costs here are the API calls themselves. So this could be custom integrations that you have, but it's also tooling like the data estate insights. It's charged by the API calls. That's how it goes and fetches this information to create these reports. So that's another way. Because of the kind of consumption-based model here, though, it is relatively difficult to kind of pre-calculate what these environments cost. You can usually calculate pretty easily what the top end is going to cost, but without actually utilizing them, they can be pretty hard to anticipate what your ongoing costs will be. So there's definitely some complexities with this. So to kind of close this out, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about the pace of innovation here and where Purview is going in the future. One, if you go to the Microsoft Learn site and look at kind of the Purview information, you will see that there are monthly updates occurring with Purview. The rate at which they are adding features, enhancing features, consolidating these features together is very rapid. It's as rapid as what you were seeing with other tooling like Power BI and Fabric and some of the other areas. So this is an area or a tool set that is rapidly in flux and is rapidly improving in a pretty short period of time. At the same time, though, the overall vision here from Microsoft is pretty huge. They are trying to build a comprehensive single, again, pane of glass interface or suite of tools for managing your data, whether it's security, governance, or compliance, and potentially even more in the future will be added to this as well. So it's very ambitious what they're trying to build here. And as a result of that, again, I think there's a fair amount of holes that are still in this platform. It is absolutely capable and something that you could start doing today. But it's also, there's going to be certain features and functionality that are just not as widely implemented as others. So example, the data governance, data policy tools, it only supports a handful of services right now that it can apply a policy down to, as an example. And so we'll have to wait to see where it goes ultimately in the end. The other area of rapid innovation here is around AI and automation. Tools like Copilot are starting to be built into various areas of Purview to help give you insights around your data, whether it's in a catalog, whether it's security aspects of it, and so forth. And so that's another kind of a important growth area here and something that's pretty exciting overall. I think we can move on to questions, but I'm hoping, again, I know this is a very high level kind of overview. So I do also want to throw out just a general offer here that if you have specific questions about any of these pillars that we've covered today or any of the individual components within those pillars, we would be very happy to follow up and then go into some more detail around those services. But yeah, if there's any questions, we can certainly go into that now as well.
At this point, you can feel free to come off mute. We don't have any questions in the chat right now. But Pierre and Chris, I'll ask a quick question. And it goes back to something Chris was talking about as far as how to get started, right? So if I have, let's say I have M365 E5s, but I haven't really implemented any of the Purview features, where would you recommend I get started?
A great starting point to achieve immediate results is to look at the Compliance Manager tool. And it's not even necessary to have that E5 to take advantage of that tool. It provides you an immediate checklist of to-do items for your organization. Moving beyond that, the next great start there, I would suggest a data risk check. Our team is happy to help with that process. With a data risk check, we can go through those first three key starting points of defining your sensitive data, of determining and discovering where that sensitive data is, and then provide analysis and reports and next steps on how to enforce and design controls for that sensitive data. So please reach out to our team. We have a very well-established process to get those first key steps of your journey into Purview completed.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and on the data governance side, again, it doesn't really matter whether you have an E3, E5, whatever, because the costing here is going to be incurred based on that consumption. Where I would recommend starting is actually with some of the documentation, but a very specific section of the documentation. When you go out to the Purview Learn site for data governance, there's a section on best practices, and it gives you some guidelines on where to start when pulling in data sources. There's a lot of flexibility in how you kind of organize your data estate inside of your data catalog and with your data map, that it is pretty easy without some guidance for you to waste a lot of time pulling in data and then doing it in a way that it's very kind of chaotic and disorganized. So I would start with those best practices, or I would start by reaching out to someone like our team that has some experience with this to kind of help you with it from a guidance perspective of where to get going. But once you have at least an idea of how you could start organizing it, it's really simple to get started. You just set up some connectors, you establish, let's say, a one-time scan just so you can kind of see the type of information that's being extracted. And then you go from there by kind of layering on some of those enhancements around classifications and glossary services and those type of things.
Wonderful. Wonderful. According to the survey results, less than half are using, half of the folks are using Purview, and only 53% of the team, and recognize we're dealing with a small sample here, but have a data governance solution. So I'd certainly suggest that people at least consider this, especially like I said earlier, with the needs and the risks of AI. Data governance is I'm going to say it's critical. So anyhow. All right, as we're wrapping up here, any final questions? I don't see anything in the chat. If there's no other questions, please do our website. We have a number of this webinar. In addition to, Michelle mentioned she'll share this with the attendees, but we also have a lot of webinars that we've done in the past that are all available on our website, from our website. So please do check that out. That's covenanttechnologypartners.com. Also, we also offer a lunch and learn on this same topic. So if anyone's interested in doing a little deeper dive and looking at it specific to your organization and your environment, by all means, you can reach out to any of us, any of the Covenant folks. That's Michelle, myself, Chris, or Pierre, and we're happy to help coordinate a lunch and learn. And then please look forward to our future webinars. Pierre, Chris, thank you very much for the knowledgeable insights.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks all for joining. Have a great day.